The procession had already begun when an angry voice ripped through the carefully maintained order of the royal formation. Catherine's calm finally gave way. Meghan refused to step back. Then King Charles lifted one hand and gave an instruction almost never seen before. Stop the state procession immediately. The music fell silent, footsteps came to a halt, and before the stunned crowd could understand what had unfolded, a private family conflict had turned into a full-scale crisis for the monarchy. Before we dive deeper into what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another update. Charles understood that every passing second now carried serious consequences. The state procession, an official public ceremony in which senior members of the royal family represent the monarchy, had been planned down to the exact minute because even the smallest interruption could be viewed as a sign of weakness before the nation. That morning, Queen Camilla, Prince William, his wife, and every senior royal involved had carefully rehearsed every entrance and every position. The Queen remained alert for even the slightest crack in the formation. The crown, meaning the sovereign and the institution acting under his authority, relied on that discipline to project stability even while the family behind it remained deeply divided. Meghan had arrived under terms settled during difficult private discussions. She had permission to attend, but she was expected to remain in a designated position instead of joining the central formation. The Duchess viewed that decision as a deliberate attempt to humiliate her. As the procession started moving, she stepped beyond the agreed boundary, turned toward Catherine, and accused her of supporting a plan designed to reduce her standing. The exchange quickly became deeply personal. Tears welled in the princess's eyes before the king's command echoed across the scene. Stop the procession. William reacted instantly, moving straight toward his wife. He spoke quietly, but Catherine turned her face away, trying desperately to hide how deeply the accusation had wounded her. At the very same moment, Harry reached for Meghan. Caught between defending her and recognizing the crisis unfolding before them, she pulled away. In her mind, backing down now would look like admitting she had been wrong. Charles locked his eyes on the Duchess, making his decision unmistakably clear. No family member, no guest, and no personal grievance would be allowed to transform a state occasion into a personal confrontation. A senior equerry, the experienced royal officer responsible for assisting the sovereign, accepted the ceremonial schedule from the king's hand. Charles ordered Catherine to be escorted through a side entrance and instructed that the Sussexes be separated from the main procession. Before leaving, Catherine gripped William's sleeve tightly. He felt the tremble in her hand, and the shock on his face hardened into controlled anger. But the confrontation itself was not the only reason Charles had reacted so swiftly. Earlier that same morning, he had received a warning suggesting Meghan intended to challenge the position assigned to her. To understand why a single accusation was powerful enough to stop the machinery of the monarchy, the emotional scars carried by these 5 individuals must first be revealed. Behind the uniforms, the royal titles, and the carefully rehearsed expressions stood 5 people carrying 5 completely different versions of the same family story. Charles feared losing control of the monarchy. Catherine feared becoming the target once again. William saw an attack against his wife. Harry saw yet another palace door closing in his face. Meghan saw confirmation that she would never truly be welcomed. Their clash had not been created by one emotional outburst. It had been building silently for years. Charles viewed the halted procession as far more than an embarrassing family dispute. The monarchy, the institution led by the reigning king or queen, depended on stability, especially at a time when public confidence was already facing growing pressure. As a father, he feared losing Harry once more. As sovereign, meaning the individual who occupies the throne, he could not allow that fear to weaken the authority of the crown. The king had personally approved his younger son's attendance, hoping that a single invitation might begin reopening the road toward reconciliation. Instead, that fragile hope now appeared completely broken. Catherine felt the accusation far more deeply than anyone around her realized. After weeks of preparation, her position beside William represented continuity and the future of the monarchy, not a victory over another woman. Inside a private antechamber, a small waiting room connected to the main ceremonial hall, she admitted that Meghan had attacked her integrity rather than her title. The princess had played no role in approving the seating plan or deciding the formation. William placed both hands firmly on the back of a chair, forcing himself to contain his anger because a heated confrontation would only increase his wife's pain. The prince stepped closer, spoke with calm reassurance, and chose Catherine's well-being over immediate retaliation. Harry faced an entirely different kind of torment. After being separated from the main party, he asked Meghan why she had chosen to confront Catherine moments before the procession began. The Duke, a royal title traditionally granted to senior male members of the royal family, expected to hear regret. Instead, his wife insisted that remaining silent would have meant accepting public humiliation. Meghan believed the assigned position had been deliberately designed to highlight her reduced status. Harry understood the source of her anger, yet he could not erase the image of Catherine walking away in tears. Camilla entered Charles's private room carrying the briefing note that had been delivered earlier that morning. The written warning explained that Meghan might demand a last-minute alteration to the order of precedence, the official ranking that determines where members of the royal family stand or move during ceremonial events, if she believed she had been visibly excluded. The Queen Consort reminded Charles that the potential danger had already been identified before the ceremony ever began. The king stared silently at the document, hurt that Harry had failed to stop the confrontation and unsettled by how accurately the warning had predicted everything. At last, Harry lowered his voice and quietly told Meghan that Catherine had been crying. For a brief instant, the Duchess appeared shaken. Then she replied that the real wound had started long before that morning. Her answer pointed back 3 days earlier to a private rehearsal where a single sentence had transformed hurt into open defiance. The procession may have stopped before the eyes of the world, but its true beginning had taken place behind the closed doors of that rehearsal room. 3 days before the procession, there had been no raised voices and no tears. There was only a conference table, a printed formation chart, and one devastating sentence delivered with calm administrative precision. Meghan was shown the place where she would stand. Catherine was shown the position where she would lead. Harry immediately sensed the danger. Everything that followed inside that rehearsal room became the point of no return because Meghan left convinced that the palace had quietly orchestrated her public rejection. Tension filled St. James's Palace from the moment the final rehearsal got underway. The historic royal residence regularly hosts official planning sessions and ceremonial preparations, making it the place where private decisions often shape public appearances. The Lord Chamberlain's team, the officials responsible for organizing major royal ceremonies, placed the formation chart across the table. Charles and Camilla would lead the procession, followed by William and Catherine. Harry and his wife were assigned a separate arrival point along with an observation position outside the central formation. Camilla examined the arrangement without raising any objection. The Queen Consort understood that the formation reflected the responsibilities of working royals, meaning official duties performed on behalf of the monarch rather than personal family relationships. William nevertheless asked the officials to explain the distinction carefully and respectfully. Catherine remained quietly beside him, already sensing that even neutral language had the power to reopen years of resentment. Then one sentence destroyed that fragile balance. A protocol secretary looked toward Meghan and calmly said, "This position reflects service, not family closeness." Protocol referred to the formal rules governing rank and conduct during official royal events, but the explanation offered the Duchess no comfort. Meghan pushed the chart aside and demanded to know whether Catherine had approved the arrangement. The princess replied that she had not created the plan and would never use a state ceremony to settle personal disputes. Meghan heard avoidance instead of reassurance. Harry urged her to leave the room with him before the conversation reached a point beyond repair, but she remained seated. Looking directly at Catherine, she declared that she would not allow palace protocol to hide personal hostility. The Duke repeated his request with greater urgency. Even then, Meghan refused to leave. An official account prepared immediately after the rehearsal documented what happened next. Meghan requested a position closer to Charles, arguing that any visible distance would be interpreted by the public as a deliberate sign of rejection. When the officials rejected her request, Meghan warned that if no one addressed the issue, she might raise it herself during the ceremony. The king became aware of that warning after a private discussion with William. Even so, he refused to cancel the invitation. Deep down, he believed doing so would destroy his final opportunity to rebuild his relationship with Harry. Silence settled over the room after everyone had left. Catherine quietly picked up the discarded formation chart, smoothed it out, and softly told William that Meghan had already chosen the person she intended to blame. William tried to comfort her, yet neither of them truly believed the threat had disappeared. That fear soon became reality during the procession. Now, behind the closed doors of the palace, Charles was preparing to bring every hidden resentment into the open. The palace gates had shut, but the conflict was only beginning. Charles stepped into the private chamber while the procession remained suspended and demanded that everyone explain what had happened. Meghan refused to apologize for confronting the situation. William refused to allow Catherine to become the family's sacrifice. Harry attempted to calm both sides, only to realize that neither believed he could remain impartial. Then Catherine entered the room. In that instant, the argument stopped being about royal protocol and became something far more painful and deeply personal. Charles called Harry and Meghan into a private reception room where William was already waiting. The chamber, usually reserved for confidential discussions before major state occasions, shielded them from the media but offered no protection from responsibility. No junior aides or communication staff were permitted inside. Camilla remained in the adjoining room with Catherine, encouraging her to rest while the confrontation unfolded. Charles spoke first. The king explained that he had halted the procession to protect Catherine's emotional well-being and preserve the dignity of the crown. A state ceremony, he reminded them, belonged to the nation, not to family members attempting to settle personal grievances. He then turned toward Meghan and asked why she had chosen that particular moment to challenge the agreed arrangement. Meghan stood her ground. The Duchess argued that her assigned position had been deliberately chosen to display the family's rejection of her in full public view. William responded that Catherine had neither written the protocol nor approved the formation. The prince demanded that Meghan immediately withdraw the accusation against his wife. Harry urged his brother to calm down, but the future king replied sharply that staying silent had already caused enough damage. The Duke stepped back, hearing not only criticism of Meghan but also an accusation of his own inability to stop what had happened. Before Camilla could convince her otherwise, Catherine entered the room. The princess fought back fresh tears before looking directly at Meghan. She admitted that palace decisions could sometimes feel harsh, but disagreement could never justify turning another person into the target. The queen consort followed closely behind, fully aware that Catherine had not entered because she felt strong, but because she refused to let others speak on her behalf. Meghan reached into her folder and removed a copy of the rehearsal record. The document outlined the decisions made during the planning meeting. She pointed to a handwritten note marked CP Office. She insisted it proved that Catherine's staff had specifically requested greater distance between them. William immediately demanded the document. Charles examined the page once, then a second time. His expression changed. Those initials did not refer to Catherine's private office. They referred to the ceremonial planning office, the administrative department responsible for organizing positions, movement, and timing throughout the event. Meghan stood frozen as the misunderstanding behind her accusation unraveled before everyone. Catherine quietly wiped away her tears with a handkerchief. She told the Duchess that while an error on paper could always be corrected, the humiliation she had suffered before the entire procession could never simply be erased. Charles now faced an impossible decision. Should he resume the ceremony with the family appearing united? Or remove Harry and Meghan before the eyes of the world? The truth had finally been uncovered, but it could not make the decision for him. For several long minutes, Charles remained completely silent. Outside, thousands of people continued waiting for music that never resumed, while every passing second pushed the crisis even deeper. Resting on the table were the official schedule, the misunderstood annotation, and the future of a deeply fractured family. The king could protect Harry from another painful public rejection or protect Catherine from standing once again beside the person who had reduced her to tears. He could not protect both. Only Charles possessed the authority to restart, shorten, reroute, or completely cancel the procession. Security officers warned that the continued suspension was creating growing confusion outside, where large crowds and an unexplained delay could quickly develop into a serious safety concern. The ceremony mattered because it symbolized national stability. Yet the king's decision also mattered as a father, because any punishment directed toward Harry could permanently destroy what remained of their relationship. The Lord Chamberlain entered carrying three possible options. Charles could restore the original formation, continue without Harry and Meghan, or cancel the ceremonial route altogether. Canceling the procession would shield the family from immediate public attention, but it would also suggest that one emotional outburst had been powerful enough to overcome the authority of the crown. Restoring everyone to their original positions would preserve the planned appearance. Yet it would force Catherine to stand beside the woman who had publicly brought her to tears. Charles carefully read the incident report twice. The written document summarized the confrontation, the misunderstood initials, and the immediate reactions of everyone involved. He removed his glasses, placed them gently beside the papers, and quietly admitted to Camilla that he feared losing his younger son. The queen consort answered without hesitation. Making Catherine continue beside Meghan would force the princess to pay the price for an attack she had neither started nor deserved. Camilla urged Charles to separate his love as a father from his duty as sovereign. William offered no threats. He didn't need to. His silence alone made it unmistakably clear that he would stand beside Catherine wherever she decided to go, even if that meant the heir, the next royal in line to the throne, and his wife leaving the procession entirely. Charles understood exactly what was at stake. Protecting Harry at Catherine's expense could damage his relationship with William and weaken the future of the monarchy itself. Then, with unsettling calm, the decision was made. Charles signed a written directive, an official order carrying the full authority of the sovereign. The procession would resume after a shortened delay. Catherine would remain in her central position. Harry and Meghan would leave through a private exit. The king also ordered an internal review, a confidential investigation within the royal household, to determine how the incomplete formation chart had reached the Duchess. Charles chose to deliver the decision personally. Harry's expression tightened, but he offered no argument. The Duke quietly asked whether his father truly understood what another public exclusion would mean for their relationship. The sovereign answered that he did. Those words stayed with Harry as he walked down the corridor. As Meghan left beside him, the crown had preserved order. But the emotional consequences of that choice had already begun spreading through the family. At last, the music returned. Yet the procession no longer carried the feeling of triumph. Catherine stepped forward with reddened eyes, holding herself together through nothing but determination. William remained close enough to support her without ever reaching out. Charles wore the expression of a monarch who had saved the ceremony, while quietly breaking his own son's heart. Elsewhere within the palace walls, Harry watched the gates shut and realized the family had chosen to continue without him. Palace officials moved quickly to recover the lost time. They shortened the official route and described the interruption as an unexpected ceremonial delay, a carefully neutral explanation intended to protect the royal family while avoiding public confusion. Every senior royal returned to position under intense public attention. The procession still carried enormous importance because thousands had gathered to witness a display of national stability. Yet everyone walking within the formation understood that the appearance of calm now depended entirely on Catherine concealing her pain. Before returning, Catherine paused and quietly told William that she was capable of finishing the engagement. The princess feared that walking away would allow Meghan's outburst instead of her own years of public service to define the entire day. William asked whether she was absolutely certain. When Catherine nodded, the prince carefully adjusted the clasp of her ceremonial coat with trembling hands. The gentle gesture masked an anger he knew he could not reveal before the waiting crowds. Harry and Meghan departed through a private corridor before the procession resumed. Royal officials escorted them to a waiting vehicle, ensuring there was no possibility of another confrontation along the ceremonial route. The Duke looked back toward the palace without saying a word. Meghan attempted to explain that years of rejection had finally pushed her beyond her limit, but Harry quietly replied that Catherine's tears had changed everything. The Duchess said nothing more as the gates slowly closed behind them. Charles completed the route, but fulfilling his duty brought him no sense of relief. Once back inside the palace, the king instructed his private secretary, the senior official responsible for managing the monarch's work and confidential affairs, to suspend any future ceremonial invitations involving Harry and Meghan. Their participation would only be considered again after written assurances regarding future conduct had been agreed upon. It was not exile, but it represented the firmest boundary Charles had imposed since efforts to rebuild family relations had begun. The internal review soon uncovered another painful revelation. Investigators confirmed through the original planning records that the rehearsal chart had been copied before its explanatory legend had been attached. That legend, the small reference guide explaining the initials and symbols, would have clearly identified CP as the Ceremonial Planning Office. 2 missing words had been enough to create an entire misunderstanding. When the findings reached Charles, he quietly closed the file. Almost to himself, he whispered that the entire confrontation had been built upon 2 simple letters. He felt relief that Catherine had finally been cleared, and heartbreak that no one had stopped long enough to ask what those initials actually meant. Still, one final possibility remained. Catherine believed permanent damage might yet be prevented, but no official inside the palace could accomplish that. After the crowds had dispersed and silence returned to the palace, she agreed to meet Meghan alone. No advisors, no husbands, no protection from the truth. There were no aides inside the room, no spouses standing nearby, and no ceremonial chart resting on the table. Catherine arrived first. Meghan entered moments later and quietly closed the door behind her. For the first time since the procession had stopped, neither woman could hide behind protocol or someone else's anger. What followed was not an easy reconciliation. It was something far more unusual inside royal life. An honest acknowledgement of pain, spoken without an audience. Catherine had requested the meeting after discovering how the missing chart legend had influenced Meghan's assumption. She refused to allow an administrative mistake to become a permanent excuse for a deeply personal attack. A confidential written account, later approved by both women, preserved the substance of their conversation without requiring palace officials to witness it. The meeting mattered because their conflict had already halted a state ceremony and endangered the relationship between 2 brothers. Meghan agreed to attend only after Harry confronted her during the drive away from the palace. The Duke told his wife that their marriage could not continue if Catherine's tears were treated as nothing more than collateral damage. His words forced Meghan to consider consequences instead of intentions. She could continue explaining why she felt wounded, but Harry made it clear that personal pain did not erase responsibility for passing that pain on to someone else. Catherine spoke first. She did not soften the truth. The princess told Meghan that she had been publicly humiliated during an official engagement and wrongly blamed for a decision she had never made. Her voice never became louder. That quiet restraint gave every sentence even greater weight because the Duchess could no longer dismiss the conversation as another emotional palace dispute. Meghan admitted that years of resentment had shaped the way she interpreted the rehearsal chart. She had entered the procession expecting rejection. As a result, the unclear initials appeared to confirm everything she had already feared. The Duchess insisted that palace protocol often felt cold, distant, and deeply impersonal. Catherine acknowledged that reality, but she refused to accept responsibility for every painful decision made by the institution itself. Then the silence changed everything. At last, Meghan apologized for confronting Catherine publicly and allowing her anger to become personal. She did not withdraw her broader criticism of royal life, but she accepted that Catherine had been unfairly targeted. Catherine accepted the apology without pretending that trust had instantly returned. She quietly reminded Meghan that forgiveness was not the same as restored confidence. Then the princess established one final boundary. Neither of them would appear together at another official engagement until trust had been rebuilt in private. Meghan accepted the condition without objection. She reached the doorway before Catherine spoke once more. The princess said she hoped neither of them would ever again allow the institution to speak through their personal wounds. The Duchess paused, nodded, and left without offering another defense. Their personal conflict had finally ended. Outside those palace walls, however, a single photograph of Catherine returning with tear-filled eyes had already reached millions of people. The world was preparing to deliver a far harsher judgment. By that evening, the procession itself had become almost secondary. One image dominated every newspaper front page. Catherine returning to the route with shining eyes, William walking half a step behind her, and Charles staring ahead beneath the burden of his decision. The photograph required no official explanation. To supporters, it represented courage. To critics, it exposed a family imprisoned by duty and performance. To everyone, it confirmed that something deeply painful had unfolded behind the palace gates. Television broadcasters interrupted scheduled programming and began reconstructing the unexplained halt minute by minute. Commentators compared the original ceremonial timetable, the official schedule controlling the procession's movement and timing, with the actual delay. They also noticed that Harry and Meghan had disappeared before the procession resumed. Their absence transformed a private family confrontation into a national mystery because the public could clearly see the consequences, without knowing what had caused them. Before speculation spiraled out of control, Charles approved a brief palace statement. The official message confirmed that a private family disagreement had temporarily interrupted the route and that the king had allowed the ceremony to continue only after ensuring the well-being of everyone involved. No individual was identified, yet the carefully chosen wording confirmed that the interruption had been personal, not mechanical, and not related to security. One newspaper headline captured the entire crisis. The following morning, A national publication placed Catherine's emotional return across its front page beneath 6 unforgettable words. The crown stopped. Then she walked on. The photograph became more powerful than any palace statement ever could. It showed the princess continuing despite visible pain, while William remained close enough to protect her without taking attention away from her duty. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace near the Victoria Memorial, the public monument standing before the monarch's principal London residence. Many visitors left handwritten notes praising Catherine's dignity and composure. Others argued that no private grievance should ever have been allowed to overshadow a state occasion. The debate spread rapidly because the moment was no longer only about Meghan's anger. It also raised a far more difficult question. Had royal duty begun demanding too much suffering in silence? Harry watched as one television broadcaster described the incident as the moment Charles chose the monarchy over reconciliation. The Duke quietly switched off the television, hurt by a judgment that reduced years of complicated family pain to a single decision. Meghan faced an intense wave of criticism online and accepted responsibility for her public outburst. However, she rejected the suggestion that her deeper feelings of exclusion had simply been imagined. Charles later released the corrected rehearsal legend through an official palace notice. The clarification confirmed that CP referred to the ceremonial planning office, publicly removing any responsibility from Catherine. Catherine chose not to release a personal statement. She told William that she wanted people to remember her return, not her tears. The prince agreed, believing her actions would speak more powerfully than any public explanation. The apology had been made. The official record had been corrected. Once the headlines disappeared, the true meaning of the incident would be measured by the boundaries each person was willing to respect. The procession resumed. The route was completed. The crowds eventually returned home. But the monarchy that entered the palace afterward was no longer the same institution that had left it. Charles had shown that family ties would never outrank public duty. Catherine had learned that remaining composed did not require accepting injustice in silence. Meghan had been forced to confront the consequences of allowing old wounds to shape a new moment. Harry had finally realized that neutrality was no longer possible. Charles reinforced the new boundary through a written palace directive. Harry and Meghan would take no part in future state processions unless their involvement had been agreed well in advance and supported by clearly defined standards of conduct. Formal rules outlining acceptable behavior during official royal duties. The king did not describe the decision as revenge, nor as permanent exile. He preserved a private relationship with his younger son while drawing a firm line between fatherhood and ceremonial privilege. Love could continue. Automatic access could not. Catherine emerged from the ordeal neither defeated nor victorious. The princess had fulfilled her duty, accepted Meghan's apology, and refused to confuse compassion with silently accepting blame. A confidential record of their private meeting confirmed that the Duchess acknowledged her mistake. Her pain over palace protocol had been genuine, but it had never justified accusing Catherine without evidence. The apology could not erase what had happened, yet it represented a genuine acceptance of responsibility. Harry reached his own conclusion during a recorded conversation with Charles after the ceremony. Protecting Meghan did not mean defending every decision she made. The Duke accepted that loyalty without honesty would eventually damage both his marriage and his family. William also chose to step back. After Catherine's name had been fully cleared, the prince requested no further punishment. He had sought accountability, not revenge. Charles remained alone after the final briefing and looked out toward the now empty ceremonial route. The monarch had preserved the ceremony, but even authority could restore order without restoring closeness. Before leaving, Catherine joined him. Charles apologized for the burden she had been forced to carry. The princess quietly replied that stopping the procession had protected her when she needed it most, while allowing it to continue had given her the chance to reclaim the day. That answer became the lasting verdict. Personal pain deserved to be acknowledged, but it could never be used as a weapon during public duty. Royal titles brought visibility, not freedom from consequences. The halted procession did not heal the royal family. Instead, it accomplished something far more honest. It ended the illusion that reconciliation could survive without boundaries, accountability, and mutual respect. Charles chose duty. Catherine found her voice again. Meghan faced the consequences of the hurt she had caused. Harry accepted the burden of divided loyalty. William protected his wife without demanding anyone else's destruction. The monarchy moved forward, not united, but with greater clarity. And that became the lasting meaning of the day the king brought a state procession to a halt. The crown could survive a broken ceremony, but no family could survive forever without truth. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next update. We'll see you in the next one.